Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Candace Prince with Green Hope Project. We are happy to bring yet another amazing workshop. And today we have Sito Negron, and he's going to talk to you about infrastructure. And so I'm going to turn it over to the expert and let him tell you what's going on within the city.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Candace. I feel a little bit awkward here because I'm not used to doing Zoom presentations for one, and for two, I can't see who's on the screen. So I'm not sure who I'm talking to or how many of you there are out there. But with that, I'm very grateful to Candace, not only for allowing me to present, but all of the fantastic presentations that have taken place over the last month. It's an amazing and even archival resource that she's put together and recorded. So hopefully people can go back and look at these for years to come and learn from what was presented. I'm also going to apologize a little bit in advance for my informal appearance. It's a Saturday. I'm here in my kitchen presenting from home. You may hear or see someone walk in or out as we do this, but we'll be mostly undisturbed and I'll be able to communicate. So I'm going to pause for a second just because, like I said, I can't see anybody, so I don't know who's out there. And I just want to be sure that y'all can hear me and that you see what I think you can see on the screen.
You are good.
I am. Okay, cool. Yes. Is there any way that I can see who's there? I've got a little box on the side that shows me and it shows Green Hope. Show the other attendees.
Yeah, you're good right now.
Okay. All right, cool. Well, hopefully when I'm done presenting, and I'll try not to take too long so that we have time for discussion, questions, feedback, and all that, I'll be able to see y'all. So what you see here is an image. It's self-explanatory. It's a bird's eye view. Obviously, it's not a photo. It's a bit of an idealized image, but it shows you kind of what El Paso was like in terms of both the built and natural environment back in 1940. I believe this is what this image, this postcard image was from. And you can see there, and if you can see my little cursor here, I'm doing a presentation. So I'm live here. Thank you. I told you we'd have some little interactions. As you can see here, there's a built environment. Here's some of our historic buildings. There's the Bassett Tower. I believe this is the Blue Flame. But anyways, you can see the railroad building there. One of the very stark things is there's no highway in this picture. This is the old railroad depot. And you can see the green of the trees. And in general, this was a very, very green environment. If you saw it from a satellite, there'd be a strip of green basically all the way from southern Colorado, northern New Mexico, down to where we are, almost a straight north-south corridor of green. And then it takes a kind of a sharp turn, left turn or right turn, depending on your view, and head towards the Gulf of Mexico in a southeasterly direction. I was going to say next slide and then realized that I'm doing my own slides. This is pretty much that same image today, and it's not very attractive. And more importantly than that is important. I mean, beauty is a significant thing in our lives, and we should live with beauty, but it's also unhealthy. You can see the air pollution, and you can see the highway basically dominating that view. Where the railroad was a thin little strip of infrastructure, heavy infrastructure that went through here. The highway is a big, huge, wide, gray strip of heavy infrastructure that's pretty much visible from a satellite view of El Paso, and you'll see that in a few moments. This is the same area, the same neighborhoods. So now I'm going to talk about Downtown 10, and that's the project that I'm mostly here to speak about, but there's a bigger picture and context that it exists in that I hope you'll think about as I go through this. Downtown 10 is a project that plans to add lanes to the highway, include frontage roads on the highway or adjacent to the highway, create new off and on ramps in and out of downtown, as well as in the intermediary areas such as Cotton Street, They're going to eliminate the Porfirio Diaz ramp at Sunset Heights and change up some of the all the way to Executive Center. So that would include Schuster, Porfirio Diaz, the downtown exits and entryways, the Cotton Street, Dallas Street, Piedras, and Copia. And at this point, eliminate some of the bridges north-south from downtown back and forth from our neighborhood, Sunset Heights, and the other area that's north of downtown. This is an illustration, one of the early illustrations of their plan, which, as you can see, it takes out all of the property that currently exists on Yandell. Now they have 3 proposals that they're focusing on, and one of them does not take out the property on Yandell. You can also see it eliminates some of the bridges. Like this is Oregon Street. It eliminates that. I'm sorry, El Paso Street. It eliminates that. This is the trolley route on Oregon. So it's a trolley-only bridge. This is Mesa Street. This is Stanton Street. And then it eliminates the Campbell Street Bridge. It also does some things here that I won't go into great detail about, but they're not good for pedestrians and they're not good for connectivity north-south between neighborhoods and downtown. The cost, $700 million to $1.5 billion. I think the last estimate I saw was a little north of $700 million, but I've seen estimates as high as $1.5 billion. In part, those added estimates include, especially the $1.5 billion number, that includes what would be a required local match to build a deck park, which is a different project, but it's connected. 3 to 5 year construction. So there's a construction cost, not just the amount of money that it takes from the state and from local government to do this project, but also the cost to the community in terms of the construction impact, shutting down the freeway, shutting down and tearing down bridges that connect downtown to what's north of it. So there's a very, very high impact in terms of the construction. The rationale for this project is the only one that really makes sense to us is the pavement condition, which in one small part of this project is in danger of failing, we've been told, and we have no reason to believe that that's not true. That is the section about 6 blocks from Kansas Street to Santa Fe Street, known as the trench, the depressed portion that's below grade as it goes through downtown. So that pavement there is at risk of failing because back in the mid to late 90s, they reconstructed the pavement on top of the highway, and from what I understand, the top layer is bonded to layers below with some kind of epoxy. And over the years, water has infiltrated in there and worn away the epoxy, which means the top layer is essentially floating on the bottom layer, which could then create cracks and potholes and other things that if they were enough of them or significant enough, it would force them to shut down that stretch of highway. So that part does need to get fixed. One thing that they're not looking at, but in our opinion, they should look at is simply to reconstruct that portion as quickly and inexpensively as possible. The other rationales that they've given are bridge heights, that the bridges aren't high enough because trucks now have a higher, they need more clearance because the containers they carry are a little bit bigger. Again, we think that could be solved pretty easily by just digging the highway a few feet lower instead of reconstructing those or tearing down those existing bridges. Future local traffic, which they project to grow, this is a really big one because their numbers don't make sense. They use a 1.5% annual growth for El Paso, but the actual growth in El Paso has been below 5%, 0.5% a year. So El Paso, frankly, isn't growing and isn't generating a ton of local traffic. And most of the growth is outside of this central core. Future trade-related traffic, which we believe is really their true aim, at least from the state perspective, because they want to push trucks through this downtown corridor, as they call it. And that's, for them, that's the value of the highway. It has nothing to do with meeting local needs. It has nothing to do with local quality of life. It has nothing to do with neighborhoods and improving the neighborhoods. It has to do with pushing trucks through El Paso. And then incident management, that's the frontage roads. They want the frontage roads so that if there's something on the highway, if an accident or something, they can push traffic instead of using the current system, which, in our opinion, works okay for the very, very limited number of times that there's actually a significant accident there. That works fine through our grid system, but they want frontage roads, which are, sort of mini highways that are adjacent to the main highway and have few, if any, stoplights and few, if any, right turns so that they can keep traffic flowing at about 50 miles an hour. The context. The mountains and the river really define the Paso del Norte as a natural region. We had some very big, I can see that Judy's on here. We had some very big victories recently with the city council approving the preservation of the NAP land. And I think the lost dog as well, although that might have been done earlier. But the mountains really are our calling card in the river valley. And the river valley is what sort of drew people here, right? Because it was verdant, lush, it had water, the soil was good, it was fertile. But the other thing that happened here, once people were drawn here because of the location, it developed with heavy industry, in part to take advantage of mines and other natural resource extraction from northern Mexico, from Chihuahua specifically. So we have heavy, and it's always been a trade route. This even before there was humans here, this is a natural corridor for birds, for animals, because it is the Paso del Norte. It's the natural gap between east, west, north, and south. And I'll show you a map in a minute that really shows us the location as the center of North America in a way. But we have heavy infrastructure in the heart of the city, from Chihuahuita to Segundo Barrio to Magoffin to the Chamizal to Lincoln Park to Delta Park, and including Sunset Heights, my neighborhood. We have all these neighborhoods here, but we also have this confluence of heavy infrastructure. And we have the highways and the border crossings, and we have the original impact of I-10, which was to destroy hundreds and hundreds of homes and businesses in order to put the highway through there. So especially to the east of Cotton Street, that was all contiguous city. You'd never know it now. It seems almost like it's two completely different cities. Piedras in the Five Points area, Manhattan Heights, everything that's north of the freeway, and then south of the freeway. But Piedras was once a great American street in a great American city, and there was a little Five Points where Piedras and Alameda met, just like there's a mini Five Points, but there is the Five Points where Piedras and Montana meet. And the highway completely disrupted that life of the city, completely changed and altered the life of thousands and thousands of people who lived in those neighborhoods, destroyed the property values. I mean, it's clear and obvious and well known that the closer you are to the freeway, the lower your property is valued. And so the freeway had that very, very terrible impact on our community in those ways. The impacts of the current plan don't fix any of that. It doesn't make any of that better. It makes it worse. It takes property to varying degrees. The original proposals that we saw took over 100 properties, the entire strip of properties along Missouri, east of downtown. They've since narrowed that. They've since identified 3 variations of that original concept. None of those take all of those properties. but all of them take some property, whether it's east of downtown, whether it's just directly north of downtown, or whether it's in Sunset Heights, which is just to the west of downtown. They all take property to one degree or another. It puts high-speed traffic closer to homes. It adds pollution, noise, and vibrations to low-income and historic neighborhoods. Creates new vast expanses of concrete on either side of downtown with a more visible roadway. And it reduces, ironically enough, because the whole point of this, they call it connect. They use the terms connect, but they're really thinking about large-scale freight traffic that's moving from, say, Dallas to LA. They're not thinking about connecting neighborhoods. They're not thinking about connecting the community. And it actually reduces the existing north-south connectivity that we have. And here's an example of it. And I think I showed you this image before, right? What's missing here is Yandell, the whole strip of Yandell. What's missing are these bridges here. And then these bridges that become trolley-only bridges. And so there's some variations, there's some mitigation that they can do that, as we go through the process, may improve the impact of their original plan, but it doesn't make it better than it was before they put I-10 through there in the first place. And I think now, knowing what we know after 50 years of freeway development in the United States, and we know better, and we know what the issues with highways have been. We know the environmental impact. We know the impact on low-income communities. We know the impact on our historic assets. We should do better, and any project that they do should make the impact of the highway better. Instead, they started with a concept that made it much, much worse, and anything they do to make that original concept less worse, they're going to call an improvement. But that's not really the kind of victory that we should be looking for as a community. We should be looking for the project full stop from the beginning to make the impact of the highway better, not mitigate the impact of their first bad proposal.
Judy has a comment in the chat. It says, it looks like LA.
Yeah, well, and LA was the model that El Paso's been operating on, just like most of Western cities, for the last more than 50 years, right? Basically post-World War II. So as soon as World War II was over, starting from 1950 or so, let's just take that date. We're talking about 70 years of that model, which is using road building to add value to people who amassed large-scale pieces of property that were very cheap to sit on because they were on the outskirts of town. And once you started building highways and roads, you increased the value of that property because you made it more accessible. And that's where the development took place. And so El Paso has always been based, unfortunately, on cheap exploitation of cheap resources. We had a huge amount of water resources. We've exploited those water resources and used them cheaply, although we've gotten much, much better since the 80s in understanding that. Land was super cheap here, especially desert land, the flat desert expanses of the east side. And so, it was definitely a Los Angeles type model that we saw here in El Paso. As soon as they could, right, they sort of started abandoning the city core that we had, the 1925 era city core, which is roughly Executive Center South, Fort Boulevard, more or less, to the south, and then the Coliseum area, the Washington Park area to the west, and it would have included the Radford area, although that was really decimated by US 54, another highway project that destroyed a big chunk of our original city core. And all of that, by the way, all that area that I described there, and you'll see it on the map that I'll show in a minute, all that area that I described there was linked with streetcars. In fact, we had a streetcar that went all the way down Alameda to Isleta. And Alameda, of course, is a tree-lined street. And so it doesn't obviously look the way it looked, and that ties into the theme of this presentation, which is focused on the highway, but also is meant to help us think a little bit more broadly and a little bit bigger about what we've given up and what the possibility of getting some of that back would be. The alternative to downtown 10 is the Northeast Borderland Expressway, which I'll show an image of in a moment, which would take traffic coming from the east. It could get off the highway at Loop 375, so all the way back to Zaragoza, and go around the city. No widening. We don't think the widening is necessary for the reasons I gave before, and definitely no frontage roads. What we need adjacent to the highway are the city streets that we have. The traffic is slower, it's less volume, and it provides a little bit of a buffer between neighborhoods and the highway. A frontage road would not. A frontage road would further impose the highway on those neighborhoods. And then this one alternative is to tunnel the entire stretch of highway. And you know, without getting into too much detail about the highway process, because I could spend hours and hours just talking about the process of developing this highway project. By law, they have to look at various alternatives to doing what they wanted to do, which is their original concept. And two alternatives that they had on a list for the public to comment were to tunnel the entire stretch of highway from Copia to west of Sunset Heights. And the other one was just simply to reconstruct the highway as is. And TxDOT put those on the table during a public comment period that lasted 3 weeks. We had never heard of the tunnel concept. We don't know any details about it. And then pretty much within that 3 week period, TxDOT said, okay, you know, we're deciding, or you know, they want to decide. The official decision will come in the form of I think something called a record of decision anytime between now and 4, 5, 6 months from now. They will officially say we're only looking at 3 variations of our original concept. So they haven't officially said that yet, but we know that that's what they plan and want to do. In fact, the County of El Paso submitted a comment to them during that public comment period, formally asking them to continue studying the tunnel concept and the reconstruction without the frontage roads and widening concepts in order for the community to really see the level of detail and understand all of those options. And frankly, those options are the best chance we have of coming out with a product that makes the impact of the highway better on our community instead of worse. So this is the bypass, right? So here, the Northeast Borderland Expressway, which is underlined, this is the concept of showing the traffic flow and how it doesn't have to come through the heart of our city here. These 2 dots here represent all these dots represent bridges. This bridge here, you could go directly up US 54, connect with the bypass and hit I-10 there. So you don't have to go through the heart of the city, or you could turn here and go east. Again, not having to go through the heart of our city. If you're coming from the west, you can just get off here and go around the city. And if you're coming from the east, the same thing. You go up 375 and around the city. And if you're coming from here, you just take, instead of turning left and coming through El Paso, you just take a right, a quick jog up here, and then you can go around the city. So it provides a lot of options for trucks that aren't making local deliveries to not have to come through the heart of the city. This is some stuff about the process that, again, I'm not going to go into detail with, but these are all different components of what is a very, very, very complex process. So there's the NEPA process, and I forgot to take that out. I was putting this together. Whoops. I was putting this together based on a previous presentation I had done. And the public meeting was open. It's not open anymore, but there's still a NEPA process, and there will be other public meetings. I don't know exactly when. They say sometime in the summer, or it could be in the fall. The Texas Transportation Commission has to fund it and put it on the list for funding. So that could happen sometime this summer. They finalize that list in August. If it doesn't happen this year, it could happen next year. It has to be put on what they call the STIP, which is the statewide transportation program. And it also has to be put on the TIP, the Transportation Improvement Program, which is locally designated. There's going to be some local funding and some local planning on different aspects of this project. And that's a very simplified version of the planning process. I'm sure that at this moment there's many meetings and hundreds, if not thousands, of staff hours, both for TxDOT, by the city, by the consultants on planning this. This is just a partial list of stakeholders, and you can see how many people this affects directly. I mean, we're not just talking about, the entire region, which it does affect. We're not just talking about, the national traffic that goes from Dallas to LA. We're talking about people who are directly affected by this, and some of the people that have had, the influence. I highlighted the Greater Chamber and Downtown Developers and the Paso del Norte Health Foundation, TxDOT, and the El Paso MPO TPD, because those are the major players who are pushing this version of the project for different reasons. I believe the downtown developers are doing it because they want that deck park that I mentioned earlier. And the Greater Chamber and the Paso del Norte Health Foundation. The El Paso MPO is doing it because they work closely with TxDOT, and they frankly haven't had. There hasn't been a major effort to question the corridor concept of pushing truck traffic and national traffic through downtown El Paso. It's a very utilitarian view of the highway that very much disregards quality of life and community issues. But that's where they're at. All these other groups, we have neighborhood and civic associations, such as the Sunset Heights Neighborhood Improvement Association, which I am the president of and speaking for on this issue. We also have the Central Business Association, the Downtown Management District, elected officials and the bodies that they sit on, like City Council, the County Commissioners Court, the State Legislative Delegation. We have federal agencies like the FHWA. We have boards and commissions like the City Plan Commission. And we have the property owners who are adjacent, more than 100 property owners who are directly adjacent to Missouri Street. But we also have hundreds and hundreds more property owners who are on the other side of the alley from the Missouri fronting people. So we have hundreds of property owners who are on Wyoming Street and Yandell Street and all of the subsequent streets from there. I mean, basically anywhere within a quarter mile or a half a mile of the highway, you're affected by the pollution and by the noise and the vibrations and potentially the traffic, depending on how they route traffic and create these frontage roads that we have opposed. This is the deck park concept, and I'm going to introduce it very quickly. It's not the highway project, but it's enabled by the highway project, because if they widen the trench downtown, that trench portion that I showed you earlier, then they'll also build the support structures for a deck park. So a deck park is basically three pieces. It's the piers that hold it up. It's the concrete cap on top, which is a very complex structure that has like ventilation systems and fire suppression and electricity, all kinds of stuff like that. And then it has what's on top, the amenities, whether it's grass, trees, buildings, et cetera. So three pieces for a deck park. And TxDOT has said that they would pay for the piers, that portion of it. They haven't said how much that's estimated to cost. I'm sure that somewhere there's an estimate there of the cost. But the model that they're using is Clyde Warren Park in Dallas. And in that case, it was $110 million over 10 years ago for something that's about half the size. So if you just guesstimate based on the increasing cost of concrete and steel, over 10 years, and based on doubling the size, we're looking at $200 million on the low end, and who knows, $300, $400 million on the high end, depending on those factors that I mentioned, the how much TxDOT pays, the cost of steel and concrete, and whether any local people step forward to help fund it. So my guess is the public would be asked to pay at least $100 million, if not $200 million. But that's just a guess, an informed guess based on Clyde Warren Park, but a guess nonetheless. The questions include, will both configurations, widening or existing right-of-way, be studied? We heard them say recently that they're looking at doing it both ways. It's the first time we heard that, so we need to keep asking that question and clarify it. Does the highway need to be widened in order to get the deck park? What's the cost to the public in terms of the construction and operation? So the cost I mentioned is a one-time cost, right? Whether it's $200 million or $400 million, it's a one-time cost. But then the operations are going to be an annual cost of, I think Clyde Warren Park is somewhere in the area of $5 million a year. If I have that number wrong, it's a matter of degree. It'll be millions of dollars to operate it annually. Who primarily benefits? It's an amenity, sure. It could be a nice amenity that would draw people for events, for example. But in my opinion, the primary beneficiaries of this are people who want to develop downtown because the amenity will be a draw for them. And the development could be a good thing. I mean, I mentioned earlier that Central El Paso is holding or losing population, and the growth is all to the east and the west, and outside of the city limits at that in the county. And so things that help add value to the core of the community so that we don't lose population are generally good. But there's a lot of detail in there about what makes them good and who benefits. For example, it's fairly affordable. We certainly don't want to increase the values to the point where people who are low income and live here now and benefit from going to the schools or who benefit from proximity to cultural events downtown, or who just like living in an urban environment and walking as opposed to having to drive everywhere. We don't want prices to increase to the point where those folks aren't able to live here anymore, especially in Sunset Heights, which is a very diverse mixed neighborhood. And one of the effects of the highway I mentioned earlier, the closer you are to it, the less valuable the property tends to be, and the more impacted you are by the noise and the pollution. And those tend to be the lower income residents of our community who are most affected by the highway. Can the deck be placed elsewhere? Or is there other space available for a community park in or around downtown? So for example, and I'll show you in a second, there is other space available for a community park in or around downtown, a huge green space that would be bigger than the deck park and would truly connect neighborhoods. And part of the issue with the deck park, we haven't taken a position for or against the deck park, but one of the concerns we have about the deck park is that they use the language of equity, that it would connect neighborhoods and provide green space and reduce the pollution. It won't. It doesn't connect neighborhoods because Sunset Heights is to the west of downtown and Houston Park is to the east of downtown. So this deck park would not connect any of those neighborhoods. It would disconnect those neighborhoods and the current access we have for both vehicles and pedestrians and bikes. It would disrupt that current access and try to push us through the park to access downtown, but to get to the park, we'd have to cross these frontage roads. So it doesn't add up. It's not an equity project. It's not an environmental project. It's an expensive amenity. And it could be a very nice amenity, but that's what it is. It's not equity. It's not environmentalism. And we have to be very clear about that when we talk about it. So here's the bigger picture that I wanted folks to think about. There's a little bit of green available here. Well, first of all, I'll talk about the infrastructure. You can see how this area is dominated by this highway. There's Paisano, there's the border highway, and then especially here in this area, and the folks from the Chamizal have been talking about this a lot, and the community hopefully is starting to listen and take action. But, you know, here's the Chamizal community, here's the Magaffin community, and here's Segundo Valle, and they're completely disconnected from each other. This is the view with the map view instead of the satellite view, and the green becomes a little more evident. On the Mexican side, there's the Chamizal, but here's our Chamizal. Here's the zoo. This is the Washington Park area. This is the Coliseum area. This is Escarate Park. Over here, you can't see it, but there's the old Assoc area. All of this valley should be green. This is all that river valley that I talked about earlier that was here in its natural state before we industrialized the area. This is what it looks like from a satellite view. There's the Chamizal Escarate Park. This is the Washington Park area, Coliseum area. The Chamizal on the U.S. side, it's unfortunately not as green as on the Mexican side because they have trees on the Mexican side. Here's downtown without a park. But, if I can zoom in, or I'm going to share my screen here. I'm going to share a different part of my screen here and go to a map if I can do that really quickly. Well, I can't do that. So I'm going to talk through it. But this should all be green. This area here, I'm going to go back one. This area here where these neighborhoods are connected, there's this little strip of gray right there. That little strip of gray is the Cotton Street rail yards. That area is much bigger than the area they're proposing for the deck park. And there's highway infrastructure here, ramps and everything, and Paisano here, and a bridge, the Cotton Street Bridge that goes over the park here. Those elements disconnect these three neighborhoods here. The Chamizal, Segundo Valle, and Magaffin, and downtown. Imagine this being a big strip of green that would really physically connect Segundo Valle, Magaffin, and Chamizal to this area here, not only to the park and to each other, and to the Chamizal Park, but to Bowie High School, which right now, how is a kid from Segundo supposed to get to Bowie? By walking through all of this heavy concrete infrastructure. There is nothing built into this that enables, that supports, that helps the quality of life in those neighborhoods. It only imposes on it. And that's not really directly the Downtown 10 project. The Downtown 10 project just makes that worse. It doesn't do anything to help that. So a better future is possible. A better past was possible. We kind of industrialized the valley and we turned all this green to gray, and we could do much better. And I'm going to leave it there for now. I'm going to say very quickly, this is not just the case for this area that I talked about, which is relatively confined to the 1925 city boundaries, but all the way down Alameda and all the way to the valley of El Paso, there should be these big pockets of green that are connected with green spaces so that we can start to rebuild and restore this future that you see in this image that was also our past, not just in downtown, not just in the central part, but all the way through the entire valley. And I think that's the whole thing. So I'm going to stop sharing and talk to you guys and answer any questions that I can.
Oh my gosh, thank you for that, because I had no idea any of that was going on. But you do have a lot of comments in the chat. And if anybody wants to unmute and talk to Sito, feel free.
Yeah, I see that the Health Foundation invested in it. So I'm going to address, before we start, I'll address some of this. The Health Foundation invested in the visioning process. Well, they talked to me once, frankly, and as far as I know, that was the only meeting with any neighborhood or community folks. And their consultant kept saying, "What would you like to see here?" And they'd show me a map of the trench, that portion downtown widened, right, with removing all the properties on Yandell. And I'd say, "I'm not going to do that. Show me a map that doesn't take those properties on Yandell so we could talk about it. I'm not going to, talk about, because we're against widening the freeway. So if the choice is a widened freeway or the deck park, or not widening the freeway, we don't support widening the freeway. So show me a map." And then they'd say, "Well, that's not the proposal from TxDOT. So we don't have that map. We're only going on TxDOT's proposal." And I'm like, "Well, then support me in opposing TxDOT's proposal." And they're like, "Well, we want the deck park." And then I'm like, "Well, show me a version of the deck park without the highway widened." And then they'd say, "Well, but that's not the TxDOT proposal." And then we went in these circles. And so the end result was we ended up not being able to have the conversation that they wanted to have. And I hadn't heard from them since, although I know that they have a website, and that they're talking about this process that involved the city, the county, the MPO, all these major stakeholders, but no neighborhoods. And so, that just reinforces what I said about this not being a community project. It's a project that's being driven from the top down by the developers, and that's not a great project from our point of view. Realistically, what's the chance we can stop this insanity? From Judy. I don't think we can stop TxDOT from widening I-10. They own that right of way, and they've made a deal with the railroads to go a little bit south onto the UP rail yard that's adjacent to I-10. If they want to do that, we can't stop them. So if they can widen the highway within their existing right of way, or if they can make a deal with TxDOT and take some of the TxDOT right of way, so be it. That's their property. I think stopping them from taking community property, I think there's a shot. It's a small shot right now because we're not organized enough, frankly. They've got the downtown developers on their side. They've got the Paso del Norte Foundation on their side implicitly, because they haven't pushed back against the widening because they've been focused on the deck park. They've got the state delegation so far on their side, and a majority of city council on their side. So it's a tough fight. But I've heard people on city council adopting the language that we've introduced about north-south connectivity. So I've heard conversations about that. I've heard conversations about, reducing pollution. They know they need to reduce the pollution. They know they need to be sensitive to cultural artifacts. But so far the conversations have focused. So I know we can make the project better than what they proposed, right? When I started this, the comment was that they started with something really horrible, and they're going to work back from that and make it less horrible. And so we'll have some victories. We may be able to have some victories, with this small piece and that small piece. Like, for example, do we have a shot at making them keep the Porfirio Diaz exit? Maybe. I don't know. Do we have a shot at making them keep the Prospect Bridge? Maybe. I think those are realistic expectations. But in terms of at this point, making them not have frontage roads and making them not take some properties, and basically, forcing them to rethink this piece of I-10 as the major corridor for freight. So far, that hasn't happened. But I think we can, I think there's a shot if the community really pushes. Judy, so far, nobody in the state delegation has been on our side. We've talked to Representative Ortega about this. She's been to some of our community meetings where we raise these issues, but she's very invested, I think, in the idea of downtown development, and she's very invested in the idea of bringing transportation money to El Paso, which historically has been underfunded. And so thus far, based on the public comments I've heard from her, those have been her priorities and not as much the neighborhoods and the community aspect of it. I hope that she can be brought around to putting more attention on that part. Other than that, I don't know. I feel like they're all fairly, they all speak a progressive language, but when it comes to development and highways, I haven't seen, much focus or attention on true progressiveness, equity, environmentalism, community quality of life. And it's going to take people other than me. I mean, I've been very vocal on this, and they all know, where I stand. But I'm not an elected official. I don't have any particular sway other than, hopefully that these ideas make sense. So they need to hear from you guys. They just need to hear from other people, that our community quality of life shouldn't be sacrificed for this project, and that this project fundamentally should make things better instead of worse. So yeah, I mean, I think that there are people, Sunrise El Paso has a focus on the Newman plant, but I know that they're aware of it. Nick, if you could help the environmental groups release a statement, that'd be fantastic. Shoot me your email. I'll put you on an email list that where I provide updates from time to time. And yeah, I mean, I think that's a great idea, and I would love to see it happen. And I would be happy to present and provide information that anybody needs in order to activate their own networks. Judy has forwarded information. I'm very appreciative of that, Judy, that you've used some resources, your resources to share the information on this. That's all very important. Every piece helps. Any other questions?
I keep pushing for the 404. We really need that. And
I'm sorry, say that again.
I keep pushing that we need that, whatever is called border bypass extension up through the 404.
Yes. Now that has a possibility. There's a history there. That project was a priority, and I've been told by someone, I haven't found the historical record. Maybe other folks here might know a little bit about that effort, but apparently in the 90s, there was this concept of let's route traffic around El Paso that doesn't need to be going through El Paso. And for some reason, that effort failed. But that was the genesis of the Northeast Bypass concept. And in 2005 or thereabouts, the Northeast Bypass, as it was known then, was on its way to get funded. It was on one of those lists that I mentioned earlier. So it had that significant step, and it just needed the environmental and planning documents. And what happened was that apparently Ted Houghton and Elliot Shapley kind of made a deal to do the border west instead, because Houghton's priority was to complete Loop 375, a complete loop around the city. And so two parts of that were always super difficult technically to get done, and politically, they had to go over Chihuahuita, which somehow they got permission from the neighborhood residents there, or somehow they were able to do that. I don't know how. There's a freeway on top of that historic neighborhood now, which is a shame. And they also built the border west, that elevated highway that's parallel to I-10, which is another thing. Like, why do they need to widen I-10 when they literally just built a highway parallel to it? Doesn't make any sense. But anyways, in order to get the money for border west, basically Shapley and Houghton said, we need border west more. Somehow they came up with traffic studies that said border west would do more for traffic in El Paso than the bypass, which I guess meant basically that our then progressive senator, and it shows you how complex politics can be, because he was great in so many ways. But on this, frankly, I feel like he was awful. Between him and Houghton, essentially directing all interstate traffic through the heart of the community, through the Pass of the North, relegating that Assoc property, instead of the hope of restoring it to its natural state in some way, relegating it to this industrialized dead piece of land surrounded by concrete and dominated by the Border Patrol and TxDOT. That's not what we want for our community, right? We want a vision where somehow we look forward to a future where that stuff is green and restored, where the community has access to it, and the river is a factor in the community's life from top to bottom, all the way. Anyways, that's what happened with the Northeast bypass. The folks who represent the Northeast are not going to let that happen again. They're not going to roll over and let that happen again. And so there's limited funding. And if it comes down to, are we going to fund the Northeast bypass, or are we going to fund downtown? The Downtown 10 project, because the downtown developers want it because of the deck park. That's a very difficult, it has nothing to do with our ideals of environmentalism and neighborhood quality of life. That's just a straight up, kind of power struggle between people who represent the Northeast and the people who are focused on downtown. So that's where that bypass kind of politically stands. From the technical standpoint, it's pretty much ready to go. So it's years ahead of the downtown project, which is another reason why we should be talking about funding that bypass first, see what impact it has, and then talk about downtown. That just seems to make common sense, but no, I guess, politics aren't always about common sense. So.
Sito, I know we have another workshop that's about to begin, and actually that kind of segues nicely because you were mentioning Sunrise El Paso. The next workshop is Sunrise El Paso immediately after this, and it's talking about climate justice in El Paso. And then we have another one by Howard Perlmutter about how to teach the students about our ecosystem. But before we go, Sito, if anybody is watching this later on YouTube or they want to find out more, how do they get a hold of you? How can they collaborate with you? How can they ask you questions?
I'll put my email in the chat. I don't know. I don't think the chat is part of the recorded thing, so I'll say it.
Yes.
I won't put it in there. I'll just say it. It's Sito, Sito, .Negron, Negron. So first name dot last name @gmail.com.
Perfect.
Sito.negron @gmail.com.
Thank you so much for educating us about this. I didn't even know it existed.
Well, thank you for the platform, and thank you for all the other presentations that you put together. And
and guys, we will put this on YouTube. It will be on our website, and it will go out. We're going to do a feature on this one in the newsletter, so it'll go out to everybody on the mailing list. So guys, get a hold of him. It sounds like some people are wanting to collaborate, so reach out to Sito, and you guys can work on all this stuff. But thank you so much, Sito. We appreciate you joining us on Saturday.
Thank you, guys. Have a great
Thank you, Sito. Thank you.
Nice to see y'all.